Hi, I'm Colin Chu, and I'm a practicing ophthalmologist and a researcher. For example, in the UK, we have one of the lowest numbers of ophthalmologists per head of population in Europe. And besides just the ophthalmologist, even in nursing staff, wider support staff across the NHS, there's real labour shortages, massive shortages across the sector. And so trying to work more efficiently with the staff that we have is a real priority. And we are seeing this reflected in some of the developments. So several companies developing approaches for more sort of indwelling slow release devices, for example, for macular degeneration, or almost patient self-administered approaches, or drop administration. So I think that direction of travel does reflect the wider appreciation for it's not just your direct costs of the therapeutic, but how you deliver it and monitor it across a healthcare setting. So I think one of the biggest challenges for ophthalmology at the moment is the sheer burden of the numbers of patients that need help. We are probably joint the busiest outpatient specialty of any medical specialty. Almost everyone at some point in their life will probably see an ophthalmologist. And so us finding better ways of improving flow, being more efficient, and that will range from everything from, as you say, home monitoring through to innovations in terms of where patients are scanned, potentially not seeing a clinician straight away, through to then employing machine learning and artificial intelligence to almost pre-screen some of those images. Yeah, so in my area, which is retina, I suppose the biggest development this year has been the licensing of faricimab for the treatment of neovascular age-related macular degeneration and also diabetic macular edema. So you may be aware that a lot of these patients, to preserve vision, receive injections into their eyes, and that's often had to be on a very frequent basis, so almost monthly. So you can imagine the burden on the patients and also the quality of life of needing monthly injections, for years. So what's really exciting about this new product is that they could extend the interval from probably the best we could hope for, 6 to 8 weeks, up to 16 weeks without significant detriment. So it was non-inferior. And I think this reflects a wider trend, that there's now a focus on improving delivery and quality of life and the burden of treatment and the healthcare costs, because we've now sort of in many areas achieved the sort of visual preservation outcome. Now it's all about trying to maintain that, but reduce the costs both to the patients and the health service. So my own interest across gene therapy. So I think there's been a lot of developments on that. We're seeing many more companies coming into the gene therapy space, both viral and non-viral. And the eye is sort of perfectly suited for this, being so compartmentalized. And obviously my interest in immunology has been piqued, but there's increasing recognition in ocular gene therapy that immune responses are important. And even though we've not been seeing overt inflammation, I think there's now a wider industry recognition that this is something we need to address. And I think that's helpful. It's a sort of maturation across the industry, and then means that we can start to really focus down and fix that. And then we're also seeing broadening of what gene therapy is being applied to beyond just the correction of genetic disorders, as they were in the past, to application to more complex diseases. So a lot of focus again on the treatment of neovascular AMD and beyond. So I think the advantage that we have as ophthalmologists is that the eye is almost through its design completely transparent. So we can look in and we have and essentially observe deep tissues within the body, and they contain blood vessels. So we can look at blood vessel health. So we can see the damage, that's occurring through, for example, high cholesterol, diabetes, hypertension, and beyond that, most diseases that affect your entire body will affect your eye. And so autoimmune diseases, we can see, that causing inflammation in the retina, through to almost any approach such as sickle cell disease. We can see occluded blood vessels. As we mentioned, diabetes, we can see those changes and know how they reflect your health overall in the rest of the body. And I think the other advantage that we have, and I think where we hopefully will push this, and obviously this is partly some of my research, so I may be biased, but we have better and better platforms for imaging the retina, and we can get down to single cell resolutions. So we could look at a single nerve cell in the retina dying potentially. We could assess how well the photoreceptors, so that the cells of the eye that detect light, might be deteriorating in any given condition. And beyond that, we can look at immune cells in the eye. And I think that will not only allow us to look at or devise better ways of studying, eye health, but can be used to study fundamental biological processes in living patients, something that's really not as easy to do in many other approaches to other organs. You can't really easily look in at your liver or look in at your heart directly, whereas we can, just almost take photographs of the back of the eye or other simple scans non-invasively and repeatedly across time. So I think we hopefully have a lot to offer in the ophthalmology field, and that's an area of growth that I hope will occur in the future. And not my expertise, but the use of artificial intelligence, machine learning being applied to big data across the healthcare field will definitely expand. And I think the NHS, if we handle it right, particularly in terms of giving patients confidence that their data will be handled and protected correctly, I think the NHS really is a world leader, just in terms of the fact that we share so much data and we acquire it in many using many common systems. So I think we'll see a lot of development and support going in that direction. And then in terms of, I think, a field called optogenetics, I think there's a lot of excitement there. So for patients that have really very significant visual loss, there's a lot of exciting work emerging where you can, again, use different approaches to transfer light-sensitive proteins into the remaining cells of the eye and restore a degree of vision. So I think that, again, is a hugely exciting area, and we'll see a lot more progress there. Perhaps one of the benefits from the pandemic has been the sort of enablement and use of sort of apps and much more interaction with online delivery of healthcare. So virtual appointments, video calls, telephone calls, certainly in our own service has been now employed much more widely, and I think not necessarily with a lot of resistance. I think for many people where the issue or problem is relatively minor, people are happy to save their time and access healthcare remotely. So I think we'll see that continuing. I don't see that changing. In our own service, we're using more and more of what we call one-stop or imaging appointments. So for example, patients with retinal disease, they come in, they only see a technician, and then they have all their scans and tests and then go home. And then a doctor remotely reviews all their images and writes to them or telephones them afterwards. And that just means that patients aren't waiting in waiting rooms for a very long time, and improves the efficiency for everyone. And certainly I think we'll see an expansion of those sort of approaches in the delivery of care. So I guess our equivalent at the moment is that we recommend most people go annually for an eye check at their local optician. And in fact, a lot of patients that we see in our clinic are picked up from that sort of asymptomatic screening. But there is, a push through devices. For example, you can put adapters onto an iPhone and take a picture of the back of your eye. So I'm sure it's only going to be a matter of time before, more elements come together. There are now contact lenses that can remotely monitor the pressure within your eye and directly link that to a mobile phone device. And so I think there is going to be, continual progress on this front. I think people are becoming more familiar with, smartware, watches, home monitoring, using a whole range of devices. And particularly, as the younger generations come through, I think there's very little hesitation around that. So I'd say the big I think limitation that's becoming more clear is actually the computational power or the sort of infrastructure within many hospitals to deliver this. So there are many sort of competing software options. Many hospitals are creating their own in-house solutions, so there probably is a lot of inefficiency, but then it has to be tailored correctly to the end users. So often systems, for example, that might work well across a general medical approach in a hospital often are not suited at all to the treatment of patients with eye diseases in an eye clinic. So I think that is really important, but also just the sort of existing infrastructure. So even as we shift to doing a lot of more of this through web portals or on the cloud, having a good computer in the clinic that can rapidly access that is an issue. And so again, more intelligent solutions or more efficient solutions to that, I think, will make a big difference. Obviously, now the UK's involvement in Horizon Europe, the massive €95 billion funding program, looks like it may not happen. So, science is really going to stretch. Obviously, since Brexit, we're now having a lot of recruitment issues into science. So, for example, PhD students, we used to be able to take them from all across Europe, and they were charged with tuition fees at the UK rate. Now they have to pay full, overseas rates. So there's a few little things that give you a flavour for what's happening on the academic side that may be ultimately impacting translation. I think the government, I think, announced they wanted to increase our GDP spend on R&D from about 1.7 to 2.4%, and I think a lot of that is meant to be sourced from industry interactions and collaborations. But it's not something that you can just create. It's an organic process where we're all interpersonal creatures, and so I think trying to build those links are where the most successful relationships come out of. And often by the time you get down to the nitty-gritty, quite a finesse product, a lot of academics have already pushed it in one direction that may not necessarily then work for industry. And so again, earlier communication, earlier interactions may benefit, as well as then you have many more ideas. And once you build a relationship and trust, you probably find that there are all these other projects ready to go. But without someone to speak to, then I think those just never take off. There's also, I think, a reticence amongst a lot of academics to necessarily pair up with a large partner straight off. And so we're seeing that balance between spinning it out yourself versus, partnering up early. And I think that is an interesting conundrum. Many scientists don't necessarily have the expertise to run a business and spin out a company. So unless they have the right support, then a lot won't necessarily go down that route. And long term, it's hard to say which is a more successful approach. I guess if you're focused just on delivering for the patients as quickly as possible, potentially partnering with a large established industry member is going to be quicker. But then I know as a scientist, you're then more anxious about losing control to a degree of the way that your product or your medicine will develop. Almost pairing with translational labs at an earlier phase, having more of an established relationship. Because I think for a lot of researchers, they just don't know when, where, who, so even like a database of, potential companies that maintain an interest in areas that you can go to. Otherwise, most people end up just relying on their university sort of departments who, again, are often understaffed. So again, that limits, potential interactions, access. So all of those aspects, facilitated by industry, could be fruitful. Yeah, I think there's a big shift in what's being done preclinically in academia versus industry now, and I think there's been huge investment on the pharmaceutical side for many, many big players to do a lot of that fundamental early research, in-house. And actually, there's been a lot of attraction for academics who have I know many people who are moving to industry because of these new opportunities, potentially because there's a funding squeeze in the academic sector, but also, there's almost some of the more exciting work is now shifting to industry.